Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's Last Post ceremony. My name is Richard Cruz, and joining us today from the Australian Army is Major Adam Davidson. We warmly welcome the family of Lieutenant Norman John Browne, whose story will be told shortly. We're honoured to acknowledge Mr. Barney Kane, veteran of the Second World War and former member of the 2nd 4th Australian Infantry Battalion. As always, we welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that love and support them. We acknowledge the members of RSL Services Clubs Association, RSL Victoria and RSL Queensland, who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. And during this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection by family and visitors to the memorial. If you're able, I invite you to please stand and join in singing the National Anthem. If you're able, please be seated. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn their loved ones buried in faraway lands. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight we'll read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and on operations for more than a century. But first we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths and floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection.
Today, we remember and pay tribute to Lieutenant Norman John Browne. Norman Browne was born in March 1889 in Albury, New South Wales, the son of William and Nellie Browne. As a young man, he worked in Albury as a labourer, where he was known as Jack. In September 1914, Browne was among the first to enlist in the Australian Imperial Force. He joined the 13th Australian Infantry Battalion, whose members were mainly drawn from his home state of New South Wales. After training in Australia, he embarked from Melbourne on the transport ship Ulysses in late December, bound for Egypt. Having completed further training at the Australian Army camp in Egypt in April, the unit prepared to land on the Gallipoli Peninsula. The men of the 13th Battalion landed on Gallipoli late in the afternoon of the 25th of April 1915. Browne distinguished himself during the campaign on Gallipoli and was promoted first to corporal in May and then to sergeant in June. In August, he was attached to brigade headquarters but became ill soon afterwards. He was evacuated to the Australian hospital on the island of Madras, where he spent a month in recovery. In December, Australian forces withdrew from the peninsula and Browne and his battalion returned to Egypt. Browne was back in hospital in early 1916 with the mumps and after recovering continued training in Egypt. In June 1916, the 13th Battalion embarked for Europe, sailing to Marseille in southern France. The unit first saw action on the Western Front at the village of Pozières in August. During the fighting, the Australians experienced heavier and longer artillery barrages than they had on Gallipoli, and almost half of the 13th Battalion became casualties. Browne continued to distinguish himself on the battlefield and received a commission as a second lieutenant. The 13th Battalion remained in the Somme sector for the remainder of 1916. In late November, the unit was involved in the fighting at Gerdecourt. Browne led his men through captured German trenches, killing an enemy sniper. For his exceptional service at Gerdecourt, he was awarded the Military Cross and promoted to the rank of lieutenant. Over the winter of 1916 and 1917, Browne was sick once more and spent time in hospital at Etaples on the French coast. He returned to duty in February. In April 1917, he was wounded at the First Battle of Bullecourt. After recovering in hospital in England for several months, he trained and rehabilitated at the army camps there. In August, he rejoined his unit, now in Belgium. During the Third Battle of Ypres, September and October, the 13th Battalion was in a reserve position in that town. In March 1918, German forces launched what was to be their last great Western Front offensive of the war, known as the Spring Offensive. Browne and the men of the 13th Battalion were billets in Nové Église, south of Ypres, in Belgium near the French border. On the morning of the 22nd of March 1918, Browne was organising a tug-of-war match when a stray German shell landed amongst the group. He was severely wounded and died shortly afterwards. He was 29 years old. Jack Browne is buried Wester Farm Cemetery in Belgium alongside 130 other Commonwealth soldiers. In Australia, he was survived by his parents, his brother Charles, and his sisters Lillian and Nell. His grieving parents had the following epitaph inscribed on his headstone: "In sure and certain hope of a glorious resurrection." Lieutenant Norman John Browne is listed on the Roll of Honour on my right, amongst almost 62,000 Australians who died while serving in the First World War. A photograph of his headstone is displayed today beside the pool of reflection. This is but one of the many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Lieutenant Norman John Browne, who gave his life for our freedoms, for us, and in the hope of a better world.
If you're able, please stand for the reading of the ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them. Lest we forget. We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Pozières or in the low scrub at Gallipoli with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, that concludes this evening's last post ceremony. We thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial and wish you all a very good evening. Thank you.